Right. So welcome to our presentation on perfectionism. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different aspects of perfectionism and hopefully what we can do about it. But before we get going, um, my name is Lisa Doby. I'm one of the psychologists at Sasko River Center, and I am here with.
Good morning. I'm Carrie Potoff, and I am a licensed clinical social worker at Sasko River as well. So welcome, everybody.
And before we get going, I wanted to mention that if you have any questions, we have a couple of sort of question times built into this presentation, at which time we're going to be looking in the chat to see what questions are there. So if you have any questions as we're going along or any thoughts or anything that you think you'd like to bring up, feel free to just pop it into the chat and we'll check it out. Like I said, at those kind of 2 points in our presentation.
So this is just a little cute cartoon just to start us off. Obviously, we're talking about perfectionists, and just to before we get to the agenda, perfectionism isn't a diagnosis per se. We're kind of just talking about kids that kind of fit the model of being perfectionistic. It's kind of a part of all of our personality traits. So we're gonna get going with the agenda just so you can see what we're going to be covering today.
All right, so we are going to be talking about what perfectionism is, what it looks like, talking to kids and teens about perfectionism. So, what are some pros and cons? Because there are both. And then kind of experimenting with approaching things differently and what parents can do to create a different approach. And a lot of that has to do with living by values instead of rules, which we're going to talk a little bit more as well. But if you, just as a sneak peek, if you are a perfectionist, a lot of times you live by kind of what you should do. And so we're going to be talking about more like, well, what is your ultimate goal? What do you want to do?
So this is a movie from I don't exactly know the year, but probably 10, 15 years ago already. But we wanted to play it for you all just so you could see how much has actually not changed too much even since COVID. So we're gonna show you this and then we'll circle back on the back end.
Hopefully everybody can hear it. So please let us know if you can't.
I can't really remember the last time I had a chance to go in the backyard and just run around.
School's just so much pressure that every day I would wake up dreading it.
I'm afraid that our children are going to sue us for stealing their childhoods.
I would spend 6 hours a night on my homework.
You have to get into the top schools.
You have to take tests and do interviews.
It's gone way to the extreme.
We're all caught up in it. In America, if you don't earn a lot of money, something went wrong.
The pressure comes from the colleges, from the parents, from the government, but it has to stop.
You have to do well now so you can get into a good college.
Everyone expects us to be superheroes.
You have a fear from the parents that my kid needs to be able to get a job.
How do you expect it to do well when you can't even make mistakes?
You're dedicating your whole life to your grades.
You have to be smart and you have to be involved in the arts.
I have soccer practice every day, plus the homework on top of that.
Produce.
It's impossible. I couldn't cope.
I've gone through bouts of depression just because you feel so swamped.
I almost had an emotional breakdown.
There have been 6 suicides in our school district.
Our students are pressured to perform. They're not necessarily pressured to learn deeply and conceptually.
So what is that going to mean when we have a whole population of dentists and doctors who've been trained from a script?
Things that actually get our students to think are pushed aside.
These kids come to the table with this creativity and this love of learning. Let's just not take it out of them.
I think the United States really needs to rethink how we do schooling. The economic future of the country depends on our addressing this.
We need to redefine success for kids. It's got to be something we do together. All of us as a society, almost as a movement.
Jobs need you to be a critical thinker. They need you to be a problem solver.
We need to really think, what does it take to produce a happy, motivated, creative human being?
So that was obvious called a Race to Nowhere. Now it's about 15 years ago, and you can see that a lot of the things that they're talking about in that movie kind of track even today. So that is what we're going to start with.
Yeah. And one of the things that as we were watching this little clip, there's like a little kid, I think he has red hair. But he's not very old, and he talks about like the pressure of like getting into college and so that you can kind of get a good job and move on from there. And it just reminds me of when I used to work in schools. There was many years ago, there was a second grader who was so concerned with her reading level as a second grader, because she in her head needed to be like the top reader in the classroom, because if she wasn't, then she wouldn't be able to like she had played it out all the way through, like, then I can't get into the best college, and then I can't get like the best job. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're 7. So I
Yeah.
think we're going to talk more about kind of how we inadvertently pressure kids and sort of lean into this perfectionistic profile.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that reminds me, I had a kid too, and he was worried about not being able to do his taxes, and he's probably 10. So
Yeah.
it starts early. It starts early.
Yeah.
So here we go.
So, the definition of perfectionism that we're kind of working with is that perfectionists are people whose standards are high beyond reach or reason, and who strain compulsively and unremittingly towards impossible goals, and who measure their own worth entirely in terms of productivity and accomplishment. And I am assuming that if you are attending this presentation, that you either recognize some of this in your kids, or maybe you even recognize some of it in yourself. When we were putting this presentation together, Carrie and I were joking a little bit, or I was joking a little bit, because I completely identify as someone who is perfectionistic, who has definitely fallen into the traps of perfectionism. But I think it's nice to sort of see what the definition is in kind of black and white, and reflect on what it means. And so Carrie mentioned earlier that perfectionism is not a disorder in and of itself. It does not appear in the DSM. It's not something that we would diagnose you with. It's more of a personality style. It's more of kind of a way that you approach the world, approach your life. And we see perfectionism across a lot of different disorders. I think the ones that come to mind for me are things like a lot of anxiety disorders, but like generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, eating disorders have frequently interface with perfectionism. And perfectionism is a risk factor for various disorders. So if you are perfectionistic, if that is how you view the world, it can make you more likely to develop a disorder. And it can also be a maintaining factor, meaning that if you are perfectionistic, it can be harder to treatment might not be as effective in sort of moving you out or helping you with that, whatever that disorder is. And bring up that we're going to talk more about like the pros and cons of perfectionism, but I think these are some definite big cons we often see.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just some things that parents that we'll hear from parents, during intake or throughout our treatment with children and teenagers, even young adults. So you can see it runs the gamut. So my child does well at everything: school, sports. Other parents dream of having a child like this. You never have to remind him or her to do homework or practice or anything like that. But this is what Lisa was saying about the cons. My child is wound like a spring. My child is too hard on herself. I wish she could just be a kid. My child freaks out about the little things, like a grade on a small quiz or the night before homework. And it just gets exhausting, not only for the child, but for the parent to witness their child, going through this kind of excruciating kind of tantrum or freak out, or whatever you want to call it. And so we have parents that try and settle things down, but it's just really hard when it's kind of deeply embedded in the child. And then with that, here's some more kind of quotes that we hear. A lot of procrastination. So we're going to talk about that later on, about how procrastination and perfectionism kind of go hand in hand. And kids can be really intelligent. They can be in the gifted programs or whatever, but they just can't seem to start a project. They'll do everything but start. And we'll talk about the risk of, starting it, and then the risk that it possibly won't be perfect. So it's better just not to start. My child is always handing in work late. So I have a lot of kids that are really backed up on different assignments, and their parents will go in Google Classroom and see like 10 missing assignments. And again, it's not that they're lazy or they can't do it. It's just they get so bogged down with the possibility of it not being perfect. My child won't share unless he or she is 100% confident in the product. So these are just some things that we hear from parents and caregivers of what their child might be saying to them.
And as Carrie mentioned, a lot of times perfectionism and procrastination go hand in hand. And I think that for a long time, I really thought of, and I think a lot of people do, think of procrastination as a failure to manage your time. But in a lot of ways, procrastination is a failure to manage your emotions. And so when you are someone who needs to be perfect, who their work needs to be perfect, there's a lot of fear and anxiety that comes up when you have to start something, especially if it's a longer assignment or if it's an assignment you're not really sure how to do it. So there's no sort of formula for doing it perfectly. It creates just a lot of fear. And so what do we do when we are experiencing a really uncomfortable emotion? We avoid it. And so if we don't do the thing that's making us scared, in this case, the work, the bad feeling goes away. So sometimes we push it off until later, and sometimes we push it off so far that we end up not doing it at all. And I think we see this a lot with kids who end up starting work late because they've been procrastinating on it because they're so afraid of starting and doing it wrong. And then that fear gets sort of overridden by the fear of, well, if I don't start it now, I'm just not going to do it. But they haven't left themselves enough time to actually do a good job or to complete it at all. And then they beat themselves up over it. So it's this cycle of avoidance and then not being able to do not even your best, but really not well, and then feeling bad about yourself. And then it just kind of continues. And I mentioned that I am someone who definitely can be perfectionistic, and I have 100% fallen into the procrastination trap. And one of the things that, for whatever reason, I found very helpful was when someone, and you've probably heard this phrase before, this statement before, but to not let perfect be the enemy of the good, meaning that good enough is okay, right? But for me, if I could tell myself that being good enough, getting it done is actually better than being perfect, it actually removes a lot of that fear of starting and making a mistake, because it then becomes okay to make a mistake or not do something perfectly. So for whatever that's worth, not letting perfect be the enemy of the good has just been a helpful phrase for me to go back to. So if that's helpful for you, steal it.
Yeah, and with that, Lisa, a lot of times what I'll help my younger kids with, that I see with perfectionism, just to kind of frame it in a way that they can understand, is if we personify perfectionism and if we delay on doing something that's important, then basically the perfectionism is going to say, see, you're not that perfect because you didn't hand in that test, or, you were late reading that book or getting that book report in or whatever. So if we kind of frame it and personify it for a younger child, that's kind of a tool for them to use so they can kind of talk back. So that's what we use for anxiety, kind of the worry bully, and kind of bossing the perfectionism back and saying, you know what, this is something I have to do, and these are the steps that I'm going to do it, and I just needed a little help to kind of get organized. Because we don't want the procrastination to say, ha ha, see, you're not that perfect. And we all procrastinate. It's not, it's not like Lisa was saying with perfectionism, it's not in the DSM and it's not like a diagnosis, but we all do it. So the most important thing is for perfectionism and procrastination is we don't want to attach any shame to those two things. It's super important. So
And kind of going along with that, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but you mentioned some things that you do with younger kids, and often something that I have found helpful is having parents kind of model making mistakes can be a really powerful thing. I think sometimes kids
yeah,
get into this
absolutely.
space where they want to do things correctly and they're afraid to make a mistake. But if you model like, oops, I screwed that up and it's okay. Nothing bad happened. It's okay. That can have a pretty powerful impact on kind of how kids view what it means to make a mistake, what it means to overcome a mistake, what it means to kind of move on from an oops.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we don't want the, the idea of mistakes to define them and get into the belief that they're not good enough or they don't measure up to others, that's a whole other presentation. But we want to be mindful of how this can kind of bleed into other things down the road, especially as kids get into late middle school and high school. So super important. Okay. This is just what was that quote you wanted?
Oh, that was where I was going to talk about perfectionism not being the enemy of the good, but
Not the enemy, right? Exactly. Okay.
but I think we're going to move into kind of where perfectionism starts and why.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we want to kind of figure out where all this starts. Now, some of it is going to be kind of embedded, right? There's the genetic component, there's an environmental component, of course, to all of these type of things for all of us. So, kids can be affected by their schools, their friends, parents, their culture. And so it's different degrees, like depending on where the child goes to school. If it's a boarding school or if it's a public school, inner city, country, whatever. So it varies depending on what the school, the rigors of the school. And then obviously, like we have to be sensitive to culture and how kids grow up and what the culture kind of dictates. And it can go back and forth. I think that parents can influence schools and then schools can influence parents and all that stuff. So the issue is when we're not all on the same page. And so if the school is setting these standards, but then at home, the parents, are trying to not put so much pressure and, just saying like, get what is assigned done. Like, we don't want you to do the extra credit and all that stuff. But then you're getting pressure from the friends, like, oh, did you do that extra credit? And, what did you get on the test and all that stuff? Then the child is getting mixed messages. So the important thing is we all have to be on the same page, and inconsistent goals is just, it's not going to be helpful for the child. So we want to be careful of that.
And sort of speaking of different points of stress or pressure, we do see that, I think especially living in Fairfield County, that school can be a source of stress, anxiety, pressure to be really successful, right? And there's a lot of pride. Schools, both public and private, I think, have a lot of pride in stating their numbers, right? Like, we sent this many kids to Ivy League schools last year. We sent this many kids to Harvard last year. Comparing themselves to other schools, like, we do so much better when it comes to getting kids into A, B, C, D, E, F school than these other places. Like, look at how great we are. And that's great. But I think we can inadvertently pressure kids into feeling like they have to go to that particular school or that particular group of schools, or there is no other option. We often provide public praise for things like the best essay or the highest grade or whatever that best thing is, but we very rarely recognize kids for putting in great effort or for overcoming something that was really difficult for them. And that could be the topic of a whole other presentation. So if you're interested at all, Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck is a great resource in terms of how you can best praise for effort. But the point here being that we really praise the product of whatever that thing is, and we praise whatever is the best. And so if you are someone who's already sort of living in a space where you might be feeling like you have to be perfect, and you might be feeling a little perfectionistic, it can just sort of add to that. We also kind of believe in this idea that everybody can get A's and that you can get an A in everything. And that is a really important thing. And I, again, as we were putting this presentation together, I was talking to Carrie a little bit about just things that I've sort of noticed or collected over time. And many, many years ago, when I was doing interviewing for my alma mater, and kind of noticing that a lot of amazing applicants were not necessarily being accepted. I came across, I think it was an article in the New York Times that was written by someone who had gone to Harvard, and he was doing alumni interviewing. And I did not go to Harvard. You don't have to go to Harvard. But his point was that he had been interviewing for, like, let's say a decade. I don't remember the exact stats, but either it was either a very tiny amount of the applicants had actually been admitted to Harvard, or the number was zero. And they were amazing candidates, right? Like, they were doing well in everything. They had awesome academics, they had awesome like extracurriculars, whether that was because they were amazing athletes or because they were like playing professional level musicals, music instruments.
Musical instruments, yeah.
Right? Like, they were awesome, and none of them were getting in, but they were putting all of this pressure on themselves, and they were doing all of these things, right? Like, they were getting all the A's, they were doing all these great things. And for him, he was reflecting on the idea that, like, what was the cost associated with that, right? So in addition to doing interviewing, he also had a kid who was that same age, who was not getting A's and everything, who was not the best at everything, but he was really enjoying high school. He was really enjoying spending time with his friends. He was really enjoying the things that he liked to do. And so I think sometimes, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to values, but I think sometimes we end up sort of inadvertently putting all of this pressure to be the best, to do the thing, to get the A, but it comes at a cost. And what is that cost? So I think when we're reflecting on all of these things, when we're reflecting on getting into the right school, getting the best grade, what does that really mean? And is there a way that we can take a step and look at, is this really in line with, like, who we want to be and with our values? And again, we'll get more to that later, but it was just an interesting article that I remember reading that has stuck with me over time.
Yeah. And I think it's about balance. Like, we talk about this with our kids and then also parents. It's just, how do you find the balance? When I talk to kids and I say, I know it's a silly question, but do you like school? And, 75% say no. I used to love school. Like, it was fun. It was, and it was a while ago, obviously. I'm dating myself, but, it
I used
was
to play
fun.
school.
Yeah, I mean, we used to play teacher, like the whole thing. We loved it. And I used to love, like, hanging out with my friends after school. And it was just different. And we know that times are different and there's a lot more stress for whatever reason, whether it's, COVID or it's just more stressful along, Fairfield County, whatever it is. But I worked in Philly and it was the same thing. And so I think it's just trying to find the balance of what that looks like for kids. And, I'll have some kids that are super well-rounded and they're doing great in school, but they're also having fun. They're still going out, they're still doing everything. And then I have some clients that it's all about school and they're just not having fun. And they're just so bogged down by the work, the current work and the work that's coming up and, the SAT prep and all that stuff. And they're just not happy. I'm sure, Lisa, you can attest. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see that, especially when, you're talking about a 14 or 15-year-old kid. So it's really just trying to find the balance that we want to try and teach kids, um, and encourage parents to do that too. So, all right.
And
Speaking of parents,
yeah, speaking of parents, um, I think we also can tend to operate under the assumption that the same group of colleges are the right choice for all students, and um, without leaving room for other like roads to success, right? So that you have to go into XYZ school or it's not good enough. And not this is not to shame or blame anybody, but I think sometimes we inadvertently sort of have this mindset or apply this pressure. Um, and then I think the other thing that we see a lot is that if you're able to, if you have the resources to, like making sure that you keep doing the thing, right? So you keep going to the right prep course. You're going to engage the right coach. You're going to do that summer program. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But I think, when Carrie talks about balance, like making sure that we're not putting so much pressure on kids to do the right thing or not the right thing, but like the best thing to get into the best school, that they're not missing out on the fun parts about being a kid, and we're not inadvertently supporting that perfectionism piece to them.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you know, parents can be obviously, I mean, just modeling, like you said a couple of slides ago, just modeling, like making mistakes or, having the kid, do the laundry and making a mistake. Like, you put the darks with the whites and then all the whites get to the dark, they turn brown or whatever. I mean, I think just even little things like that and just, it doesn't always have to be about school stuff. It's also about like just on the side, like life skills, just kind of mistakes that happen, so I think, putting in gas and like the gas gets all over the side of the car, like whatever it is, it's just trying to build out mistakes are okay and you can tolerate making mistakes. And you do not have to be perfect. I think that that's super important.
Yeah, and speaking of like little ways that you can point out, I think this is easier with younger kids, but like even in like sometimes I'll talk to parents of like elementary aged kids. Like even if you're driving and you like miss your turn, you can point that out as like, whoops, I missed taking a right there, and that's how we're supposed to go home. But it's okay. We're still gonna get there. Um, it doesn't really impact anything. It might take a few minutes longer, but really modeling that like, yes, I made a mistake and no, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
So, yeah, yeah, you go ahead, Reese. Go ahead. Start it off.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we just wanted to talk about again continuing with parents. We have to kind of be mindful of what our goals are and what our fears are for ourselves, and then putting those on to our children, and just kind of acceptance of that our goals might be different than theirs, and that's okay. Lise, do you want to go through some of these?
Yeah. I think the most important piece to me is that like, yes, parents can sort of be a source of stress, and they can push kids in ways. And again, this is not about shame or blame. It's just that, we want our kids to be the best. We want them to do great things. And so we can inadvertently be a source of stress. But I also think what's interesting is actually the last bullet point on this slide, where we talk about parents of perfectionistic kids oftentimes don't promote perfectionism. They don't promote these like being the best at everything. They often are actually hoping that their kid is going to fail at something, or they are going to be okay with a lower grade, because that pressure and of the people watching. I don't know if any of you recognize this. A lot of times the pressure comes from within the student, right? And again, I'll use myself as an example. Like when I was a kid, And I was raised by two non-perfectionistic parents, the one of whom was very anxious. I remember anxiety and perfectionism often are interrelated. My dad said to me, he's the anxious one, but when I was in high school and I was stressing about something, he basically said to me, like, I think the best thing that could happen to you is to get a C, because you would learn that it's not the end of the world. It's not going to kill you. You're going to get up tomorrow and like the world isn't going to stop turning. And you're going to learn that you can move on from it. And so I think that, I don't know, that particular point just hits home for me, that a lot of times, kids kind of develop these perfectionistic tendencies on their own. And how can we help them with it? How can we help them learn to fail, which is, we just talked about, but I think that's another important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then peers are also a big source of stress, because kids who are high achieving tend to hang out with other kids who are high achieving. They tend to set high standards within their peer groups. They might even compete with each other for various spots, like I don't know, if you think about like on a sports team or in a musical production, or something like that. Excuse me. But those kids who are kind of in that high achieving realm tend to hang out with kids who are also high achieving, who are in that same realm. And so it can sort of feed into itself. Kids often don't, those types of students often don't tell their friends what colleges they're applying to, right? Because it lowers the, if you don't tell someone that you've applied to a college and then you don't get in, you don't have to be vulnerable by saying like, oh, I actually didn't get into this school. And it can feel less competitive that way. They often don't talk about how stressed and anxious or even depressed they are, because they don't want to show weakness or vulnerability, which I also think goes back to the idea of like, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to fail. It's hard to feel vulnerable if you have not ever given yourself permission to make a mistake. And so you're less likely to reveal all those vulnerabilities or that stress or that anxiety to your peers, who actually can be supportive of those feelings. Oftentimes, high achieving kids will only share good grades, not if they did not do well. And they might say things like, "Oh, yeah, I don't really remember what that was," or change the subject again to avoid that feeling of like, "Oh, yeah, I actually didn't do very well on that." And they might also say that something was easy, that another kid may have struggled with, kind of as a way to make themselves feel better. Excuse me. Again, because they're in a group of kids that are all high achieving and competitive, and feeling vulnerable can be really, really hard.
Yeah, and with that, sometime I'll have clients who, their friends are all in the higher math class, let's say, or, honors or something like that. And they'll kind of beg and plead with their parents to get them a tutor because they want to be with their friends in that higher class. And, you know, some of my clients like are more than capable of doing it, but they're not recommended for those classes. And so the parents might, obviously they want to do kind of what their child wants and what's best for them. So they'll go to the school and pull strings or whatever it is, and the child will get in this math class, and then I'll see the kid, and he or she is just so stressed out they can't keep up, and they're seeing a tutor twice a week, and it's just to keep up with their friends, also to be with their friends. So that's great. They want to be social, but it's just at what cost, to be in that higher level class. It just doesn't, at the end of the day, it just doesn't make sense. And colleges, I mean, I'm talking about kids in middle school, but I mean, Lisa, you might know more just because you worked in schools, but I really do not think, I've just been reading so much about what colleges are looking for now. I think colleges are looking for kids who are well adjusted in their classes, who are doing okay, not struggling, and are balanced. They're not stressing out. So if you put all this bubble wrap around a kid and then you send them off to Yale or whatever, and they don't have that bubble wrap, like what are we setting them up for? So
And I think
it's
to some
tricky.
extent, the college application process is not a guessing game, but I think that there are all of these unknowns, and I think that there's there are things that are beyond your control that can determine whether you get in or not, or whether you get waitlist or not. And I think to your point, putting all this pressure to do something that might not have, ultimately have an impact.
Right.
I think it's important to go back to the idea of what are your values and what's your end goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular slide just because I feel like we have all spoken about it, we have all learned about it. But that culture and social media really don't help when it comes to perfectionism, right? So we all know that what we're seeing on Instagram or TikTok is influencers who have really curated this like perfect image of themselves and this perfect life and these perfect things. And I think, we as adults know that. I think on a lot of levels, teenagers know that. But when you're bombarded with those images every single day, it can be hard not to internalize some of those things. And it can kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? It can intensify any perfectionistic tendencies, right? Or if you're someone who is already thinking, that you don't have the perfect body, but those are the images that you're seeing, or you want your friend group to be different, or you want your friendships to look different, but you are bombarded with images of like more perfect friends, then it can just help perpetuate that perfectionistic slant already. And then it can also, if you don't achieve something that you want to achieve, but you're surrounded with all these images of perfection, it can also make you feel worse. And again, we all miss sometimes. We all make mistakes sometimes. That's a totally normal part of life. But we don't see that represented nearly as much on social media as we do with just kind of ongoing success everywhere, which I think is a lot of what we see on like those curated feeds and
Yeah,
platforms.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to open it up to any questions. Anyone have anything? We have some. They're going through some stuff with their kids right now as we speak with their seniors and juniors. Any questions at this point? Okay, we can. Oh wait, we have one. Hold on. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to get into what you can do to help your child. Okay, so let's try and figure out how perfectionism is impacting your kids and you as parents, caregivers. So we want to try and help our kids articulate what are their standards. Like Lisa was saying earlier, like what are your values? What's important to you at the end of the day? What do you expect out of yourself? What do you expect out of yourself in school? What do you expect out of yourself on the soccer field? If they're always wanting to get, like 5 goals a game, or they always want to get A's, we want to kind of talk about, tell me more about that. Like, what if you like fall short on that? How would you feel? Or what would that mean to you if that happened? And so, and also we want to, be vulnerable with our kids too and say, where do you think these standards came from? Be honest. Like, do you think it came from us? Do you think it came, from dad, from mom, from, your uncle who works on Wall Street, like whatever it is? We want kids to be able to kind of tell us, what they're thinking, just to tap in, because if we don't kind of open the dialogue, then we're never going to know. And a lot of this stuff is very nuanced. It's going to be different for every child, so we want to be able to open up the dialogue and not be judgmental and just be very open with whatever they're saying, and just listen and understand. Just be curious. I tell my parents, just be curious. So, what, Yeah,
Did I jump ahead too?
no, it's fine. I was just looking at the questions. Yeah, so, and then another way, Lisa, is this, oh yeah, this is mine. Okay. We want to understand like the positives to being perfectionistic or perfectionism. And so I'm a CBT therapist. And so a lot of times pros and cons, that's just like a tool that I use. And looking at the pros, like what benefits you out of being perfectionistic. And so we want to check what feedback we get, make sure they know it's okay, like what to like. Some kids will say they like being known as the smart one, or they like being known as the one that always scores, or the one that's really good, like the fastest, like on the ice, things like that. So we want to kind of see what is their motivation for being the best or being perfect. You know, and kind of being able to have them articulate that, and being able to kind of practice when that bar is set so high. And it's what I tell kids is when that bar is set so high and it's so fixed and rigid all the time, when a mistake happens, it's not if a mistake happens, right? Because we cannot all be perfect. When a mistake happens, it's, if the bar isn't flexible, it's going to be a big blow. So we want to be able to kind of build that flexibility in. And so while there are definitely pros that kids will see, then there's also the cons. We can go to that. And so we want to ask kids, how is this strategy really working for you and how is it not? Do you think pushing yourself to stress you out, you know, makes sense? What do you want your life to be? Is this when you're 20, when you're 30, is this how you want to feel? It's a feeling. How does perfectionism make you feel about yourself, but also inside? Like, are you always like, is your chest always tight? Are you always having a bellyache? Are you walking around school with a headache? Like, you know, how, like literally how physiologically, how are you feeling? And if you weren't working all the time or stressing out about all this stuff, what would you want to do instead? Do you want to make friendship bracelets? You know, do you want to do a pottery class? Do you want to, you know, go on a trip to Mystic? Like whatever, you know, it could be anything. So we can go to the next one.
And kind of before, I don't know, you said something that just sort of hit close to home for me when you said making sure that kids are prepared for not if they make a mistake, but when they make a mistake. And I think that that's something that it can also be really a powerful part of the conversation is like how to fix it when you make a mistake, and that it's okay to stumble sometimes. And I know we've kind of talked about that theme throughout this presentation, but I think it's worth bringing up again because to your point, like when you hit a stumbling block, not if, but when, like, what are you going to do about it? And I think sometimes when kids have historically not, right, they've been perfect, they really lose that opportunity to build some resilience when then ultimately they do hit that stumbling block. So I think helping them realize that it's not the end of the world and then helping them figure out how they can get out of it or how they can move on from it can also be a really powerful part of that conversation. Um, but we also wanted to share some of the common pros and cons that come up in session when we're working with kids who are perfectionistic, and a lot of them Carrie has mentioned already, but one of the pros is that you do get lots of praise. And, you know, again, as someone who has been perfectionistic for a very long time, I identify myself as a recovering perfectionist. You get a lot of praise from everybody because you always do things the way they're supposed to be done, and that feels really good, right? You don't get in trouble because you're doing the right thing. It feels good when you do well, when you do well at an activity, when you get good grades, and when that sort of positive reinforcement comes in, you kind of forget that it was really hard, and that maybe the emotional torment that you went through to sort of get started and put together like the perfect paper, that was really awful. But when you feel that positive reinforcement. You kind of forget about the awful bits. And again, being known as someone who's the smartest or the best, it feels really good. And so in a lot of ways that can keep us in that sort of cycle of perfectionism because there are all of these pros. But, again, there's the flip side. There are all of these cons. And so because it's always expected of you that you're going to do well, that you're always going to be perfect, is not feeling like you are able to mess up or screw up or make a mistake. And so when you do, and this is kind of what I was getting at, is when you make a minor slip up, even if it's like something as tiny as getting like a 92 on a test versus 100, it can feel like a really big deal and it can be really upsetting. Perfectionism also takes a lot of time. So to be the best at everything, you're working really hard. And so you might not have time to goof off with your friends or to do something that you like to do. You feel like your time always has to be productive. You don't have time to just kind of like go, whatever. And you don't have time to do something that's not driven by a goal, right? So you don't have time to just kind of do something because you want to and it feels good. And that can also leave less time for hanging out with your friends. And again, just being a teenager. I don't know why I think about teenagers. This is true for all age brackets, but I really think about high school students in particular, feeling like I don't have time to do these fun things with my friends because I'm doing my homework and then I have field hockey practice, and then I have my tutor, and then I'm practicing my oboe, right?
Right.
I don't know why I chose the oboe.
I mean, it's a good instrument.
Yeah,
Solid.
it is. And every single assignment, and I think I hear this from kids a lot, is that it's not just whether it's a final exam or a final paper, but everything feels like there's this pressure to it. Like it has this power. So then it just it is stressful. And so then everything feels stressful. And, I think the lack of time, the lack of sleep thing comes up a lot for me. I hear that a lot about kids just feeling like, well, I have to stay up late to finish this, and I have to get up early because I want to go to like before school. I want to meet with my math teacher or my science teacher before school so that I can catch up on this. And so they're tired all the time. And it's challenging to live life tired all the time. So
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So values. So this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And Lisa touched on many of these. We want to look at what our beliefs are, what is important to us, and not just what is kind of accepted in the outside world, like what feels good internally to you, to your child. So we want to kind of take time to explore those values, like spending time together, being kind, being honest, whatever it is, like hiking together. I have a family that loves hiking together, nature, things like that. So we want to kind of reevaluate what is really important at the end of the day. And what, like Lisa was saying earlier, what ultimately do you want out of your life? Kids will say to me, I want to be successful. And I'll say, okay, what does that mean to you? And they might say, well, I want to make a lot of money. And I'll say, okay, well, you'll have a lot of money, but what will that mean to you if you have a lot of money? And so, you really want to keep like drilling down and see what your child really wants. And that'll kind of open the dialogue up and give you insight into, where the train of thought is, and maybe an opportunity to kind of shift the trajectory a little bit. Lisa and I aren't here to say we want kids to be lazy and we don't want them to do their work and just, go to the beach with their friends and, all that stuff all the time. It's the balance, and it's a mindset of having kids be flexible and that they can't be spending, 90% of their time stressing out about stuff that it matters, but like, is it enough type of thing?
And
you
I
want to add to anything?
I'm sorry, I keep coughing, but I think going along with that too is like the notion that time is a fixed commodity, right? Like we only have 24 hours in a day. And so if you are spending all of your time focusing on all of these pieces of achievement, whether it be being the best sports player, getting the best grades, or winning the science fair, or all of those things, the understanding that that all takes a lot of time, right? And when we're thinking about balance, if we're taking all the time to do those pieces, we're probably not taking as much time to do all these other things that when we really think about it, add value to our lives. So, you mentioned the family that loves to hike together. Things like spending time with friends, spending time engaged in activity that has nothing to do with anything, right? Whether it's reading fluffy books or spending time with your dog. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Right? Or cultivating a hobby that really isn't something that you're going to put on a college application, or it's not really going to do anything for you, but it really is going to bring you joy. Like how do you, and I think articulating some of those things that are important, articulating those values can be really powerful. And then going like, okay, like how can I make space in my life for that? And then is it worth this like limited gain, right? If I'm taking just a couple of hours to do this thing that brings me joy, is that more worth it to me than getting a 98 on a test versus a 95, right? And so I think that can also be part of the conversation in terms of finding that balance and finding the things that really fulfill you as a person, and then figuring out like, is my perfectionism allowing me time and space to do the things that are really cultivating my soul, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you think, Lisa, but like I just don't want kids to think negatively about their early childhood like school experiences and
Mhm.
look back and say, oh, like high school, it was the worst and I was so stressed out all the time. Like
Mhm.
I'd rather them think, oh, it was so fun. Like, yeah, it was hard, but you know, I don't know. It's just, we did weekends at the beach and, we had so much fun. We volunteered a lot together. We like went to like just all the things that
Mhm.
again, you don't necessarily need to put on your college applications, but it was fun and it brings them joy. I would rather them have those memories. Because you're right. I think, time is fixed and when we lose it, we lose it. Like you can't get it back. And what I tell kids is the one thing I just do not want any of my kids to feel is regret. I don't want them to regret like spending so much time on something that, is just making them feel so awful in general and about themselves. So that's kind of the message.
Yeah.
So all right. Are we okay? Questions. So we do have a couple. So social media is part of this world. What guidelines do you recommend for kids and teenagers? Lisa, do you want to take this
Oh,
one?
I was gonna give this one to you because you
I mean,
tend to be our social media guru.
it's a good one. I think again, it's the balance. I think, parental controls is really important. I think the recommended age now is, getting kids a phone like no earlier than seventh grade. I think it's creeping up to eighth grade, maybe too. But at this point, you really want to monitor what applications, what apps they have on the phone. Kids are really sneaky. Kids can get the apps even with the parental controls. So you got to monitor the phone use, the screen time. You got to look at their history. It's a luxury. If they're not 18 yet, when you get them the phone, I'm not anti-phone and I'm not anti like Instagram and all that stuff, but it should be monitored. And I think when you give the child the phone, you say, look, these are the expectations. These are the boundaries around it. These are your limits around it. And if they don't like it, then maybe they just aren't ready to have a phone. So I just think every parent and family is different when it comes to social media. So I'm not here to like judge or enforce anything. It has to feel right to you and your family. But I definitely think we need to monitor at some level. What do you think, Lise?
Well, I think it's also it can be an important modeling moment too. I think that sometimes as adults we get buried in our phones. Maybe we're doing our own social media viewing. So I think it can also be a pretty powerful thing to have like non-phone time. So, some families will designate like at dinner time, everybody puts their phone in a different room and we're just sitting and we're going to have a conversation and we're going to have dinner together and really interact with each other. In terms of limit setting, I know some families will also kind of like put their phones to bed at night, meaning that like all the phones are charging somewhere that's not in your bedroom. Because I think we can also get into this pattern of, because we're always accessing social media, we just kind of get stuck on it. And, kids are looking at their devices at like 2 in the morning, right? And so I think putting limits on that and again, modeling that, like showing adult limits on that too. So like nobody has their phone after 10 o'clock at night or whatever it is, that can be a powerful thing as well. And then, I also think that having like real world phone-free experiences can be a great thing, whether that is like hanging out with friends, and engaging in a sport, maybe not competitively, but I wanted to call it fetch. It's called catch. Right? But having fun with friends in a way that you really have to be engaged face to face, I think can be a pretty powerful thing and can sort of lend some like real world perspective, which I think we lose sometimes when we are just constantly on social media and viewing these perfect cultivated places.
Yeah, and we have to be mindful of like kind of the outside in mentality, right? Like we want to be careful of how we're taking in outside information and how it's influencing us on the inside versus like the inside influencing the outside world. So, as it relates to perfectionism, if we're taking so much from the outside world, i.e. social media, and having that influence who we are, then, you know, it's it's hard for kids because we want our kids to feel like authentically themselves and what they really want and not influenced by things that they should be reading or doing or they should be wearing or they should be taking in class and all the shoulds. We want it to be authentic, like what do you want? So I think monitoring the social media is very important. And then just some books. There were some questions about books. Never Enough by Jennifer Wallace is excellent. It just came out, I think, last year or the year before. It's all about perfectionism. And that's a great, great book. And then Enough as She Is, it's kind of more focused on girls, but it's also an excellent book. And then just if you want anything on anxiety in general, Tamar Chansky is great. She has books on OCD, on anxiety, on kind of grumbly, negative thinking, that type of stuff. And a lot of times that's where perfectionism can start. So, if those are all some recommendations for books. Any other questions from the audience before we end? I think we're good.
Well, thank you so much for joining.
Social anxiety. Yeah, social anxiety. Lisa, do you know any about for social anxiety off the top of your head? I think, and build new friendships. There's so many great books out there. What I think on Sasko River's website, I'm not sure, I think there is a library, like a book list. We'll have to check, but we're gonna, if you want, you can, this recording, Lisa, will this recording be shared? Like, how does this work? I don't even know. I think it's recorded and then I think it's going to be sent out, right? Like to attendees, maybe?
I don't know if it's sent out, but I know it will be available.
Okay.
The website.
Oh, yes, it is. It will be. Yes. Okay. Yes, it is going to be sent out. So if you are registered, it will be sent out, and then you can forward it to all your favorite friends and get the word out about perfectionism. Thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate everyone showing up early in the morning. And happy spring. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Anne. Anne's behind the scenes. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you.